Hi there, welcome back to Embracing the Challenge, where we're looking at leadership. Last week, we looked at the topic of a gifted community, where we were exploring how a whole range of people can bring their gifting and talents to be expressed in the context of the church and also in the different environments in which they have influence. Now, today, we're going to be talking to a huge demographic within the church context. Obviously, my guests here with me today are all women, and we're going to be looking at the question of women's experiences in leadership. Ladies, welcome to the show today.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. Take a moment. Who are you? Let us know a little bit about yourselves.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I am Gabriel's wife. I have two children, Luke and Isaiah, and I'm a project manager in a bank in Canary Wharf. I'm originally from New Zealand, but have lived in the UK for the last 11 years.
I'm Jill Marie Cooper, to give you my whole name. I'm 33 years old. I'm a singer, an artist, and I've lived in London my whole life.
I'm Juliet, or Jules. I am an actress and a singer and a dancer. I went to Performing Arts College for 3 years, and then I went into musicals such as Matilda and Miss Saigon. And alongside my performing, I also am head of dance at a Performing Arts College in Hertfordshire.
Brilliant. Well, it's wonderful to have you all here today while we're discussing and exploring this topic of women's experiences in leadership. And really, we want to have a bit of a conversation around the whole area. Now, for context, this year, there's been the celebration of 100 years since the equality in the area of voting. Millicent Fawcett's statue's just been unveiled in Parliament Square for those who live in London. And this is representative of some seismic changes, really, that have happened in our society. There's a huge shift of women into not just the workforce, but right the way through to every level of leadership, including CEOs, and many different leadership giftings being recognized amongst the female population. Then there's the whole equality bill that's been brought into force, and that's having different outworkings right throughout society. The recent big issue is the gender pay gaps that have been published in the news. There's an increased normalization of women in leadership roles. But with all of that progress and things going on, there's still a huge amount of institutional prejudice. There's limitations and there's imbalance in lots of different sectors. And unfortunately, the church is not immune to this. We're seeing lots of different dialogues happening in this area. Recently, there was the ordination of female bishops within the Church of England. In other ministry streams, there are female ministers that have long been ordained and only recently been ordained, depending on the progress of the different movements. There are still gender pay disparities and still entrenched theological positions. Now, just for framing that so we can have a bit of a chat in that context, there are broad brush two major theological positions with regard to women in leadership in the church. They are known as complementarianism and egalitarianism. Now, complementarianism emphasizes the different unique makeup of men and women and their different roles within different communities. So when we think about a church context, the question is, well, what role can a woman fulfill? And you range from conservative complementarians who would go, or some might go so far as to say no women in any leadership position, through to limited complementarianism, which is that women can preach, teach, evangelize, prophesy, but not be appointed to the highest positions in a church context. Egalitarians, on the other hand, are fairly static in the sense they have one position, that women can fulfill all leadership responsibilities, including being positioned at the highest levels. Now, if you are interested in a book on this, there's a scholarly book called Two Views on Women in Ministry. But really, we're trying to have more of a contemporary discussion on this. Now, for me personally, I was just chatting with Becca about this. I think, honestly speaking, I was originally culturally complementarian. I think this is part of the challenge, that we grow up in a context where we get used to male and female roles, and obviously a lot of that's shifting now. And for me, I was sensitized to that, and particularly the challenge women face in regards to different leadership contexts through an ongoing conversation I was having with a friend of mine. She was quite senior in her workplace, but there was a lot of inequality, highly polarized. She was one woman with 100 other men at the same level. So she was representing very much the female position, but she found it very difficult. Me, though, I was honestly speaking a bit tone deaf. I couldn't understand what she was talking about. I was like, yeah, but you are operating at their level. What's the problem? I couldn't hear. And that's very symptomatic, I think, of a male position. Where it started to change for me was when I was doing some further master's studies and looking into one of these areas. I was writing particularly on a feminist theologian. But where it was interesting is I was comparing her with a theologian who was arguing for inclusion, and that all people should come and discuss texts together, men, women, different races, different ages, and so on. But what was interesting was all of the sources he'd used were all white males, with about 5% female or diverse communities.
Wow.
So I suddenly realized the lights went on. We are still communicating very much from the man's side and not really hearing the woman's voice.
Right.
Now, that is also made much more complex when we think about church, because in church structures, there are a whole range of different church structures. You've got scenarios where you've got a pope, or other scenarios where you've got archbishops, you've got scenarios where you've got boards of elders, you've got congregationally led churches, and you've got senior pastors. And so even there, identifying what is the leader and can a woman fulfill that role is also challenging. Now, before we get into our conversation, just let me say, obviously this is a sensitive issue. Not all women are egalitarians, but neither are all men complementarians. There is a lot of scope for discussion in this area. Now, when we focus our attention to you three particularly, you've all come to faith, as I understand it, in later life. You weren't born in Christian families. And so there's been a whole world of experience in the world context. And then you're coming to a church context and asking the question, how do I fit as a woman in a church context? And what roles can I fulfill? And is the sky the limit, or are there other limitations placed on me? Now, I think it's fair to say as well that we all really want to honor God. We all want to be faithful to the scriptures. We also recognize we're not going to solve any big debate here today, because there's massive conversations going on.
Absolutely.
But we want to step into the conversation and
Absolutely.
have it as a meaningful discussion. And so maybe we could start here then, Jules, just thinking about you and your journey. What has inspired you about women in leadership, and why?
Well, I just think for me, just growing up, my mum is a really strong woman and a really strong leader, and I think her and my dad both brought both myself and my brother up equally. And my mum got her bachelor's when she was 40, and then she went on to do her master's. She learned to drive at 40. She was a deputy head and then a lecturer. Even now she's retired, she's in the parish council and she's pushing to, politically doing stuff. And I just think they said to me and my brother that just go for it. If you want to do something in the world, just go for it. There's no limit. You just have to work really hard. And so I never thought for 1 second that being a woman, my gender, my class, my race, anything would prohibit me from getting where I want to go as long as I work hard enough. I think sometimes we get out in the world and realise maybe that isn't the case, but I was brought up to believe that. So, and I think, I had that from a young age. And then when I went to Performing Arts College, the head of Performing Arts College was a woman, very strong character. And then just getting out there in the world as well, like some of the choreographers I've worked with, like Arlene Phillips, like top of her game, internationally recognised. She's choreographed, so many musicals that we all know. And so for me, I've kind of felt, in my field, I'm kind of surrounded quite a lot by strong women leaders. And I think even for me as well, as a singer in the world and also within the church doing worship leading, I think there's so many women leaders that we can aspire to, like Tasha Cobbs and Carrie Job, and there's so many people for us to look up to, and they're not just women and they're not just leaders, they're worship leaders. And I think, I don't know, for me there's quite a lot of women to aspire to and look up to. And I think at the moment, the way the world is and the way things are changing, I think the sky can be the limit.
Love that.
The sky can be the limit.
Yeah, I do.
So what about you two? Do you have any female leaders that you look up to, that you're inspired by?
Well, similar to Jules, so coming from New Zealand and growing up in New Zealand, I think New New Zealanders generally see women and men as very equal, and like you know, the sky's the limit. There's no constraints or ceiling, I guess, to hit. And so I grew up as a bit of a tomboy, and I played a lot of sports.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Played a lot of sports.
Wow.
And like the outdoors, and my favourite subjects were maths and science, which is, you know, kind of traditionally, I guess, held more boy subjects. So yeah, I'm similar to you. I think women that inspire me, I would say my current kind of discipleship leader, Lola, is very inspiring. She's, you know, she's just going for it. She's quite creative, so she does a lot of creating different kind of theatre productions. She's been running this evangelistic event for the last 5 years, which I've been a little bit a part of. But yeah, it's just inspiring that she's just going for it and going for what God has for her to do.
And of course, as a New Zealander, you've got a female Prime Minister right now.
Yeah, definitely. So at the end of last year, Jacinta Ardern got to be the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And the inspiring thing about her, I think, is that she's 37 years old. So she's the youngest, I think, female Prime Minister in the world, which is pretty cool.
And you, Jill?
Yeah, I'd say similar to Jules, probably in the industry I'm in, that it's very celebrated to be a strong, powerful woman. But there's a few people that spring to mind that inspire me automatically. One that I met recently called Philippa Hannah, who I had the privilege of supporting on her London date of her tour, and she inspired me because she was just really bold in her faith. She encourages other women, because I think sometimes, especially in the music industry, there tends to be this thing in the media where it's women are sometimes pitted against each other, and it doesn't need to be that way, because we've all got something amazing to offer. And I think that really inspired me about her, the fact that she was encouraging me to step into who I am in God, and from what I saw, other women as well. And then another lady that I worked with called Natalie Lowe, who I did a show with back last year, who basically choreographed the entire show, but really just had a heart for people, and I just really admire her. And she was such a feminine woman, but yet so strong and gentle at the same time. And I think those are the people that spring to mind off the top of my head. But there's several others as well.
Sure, we could talk about hundreds of
Definitely
inspiring.
Yeah.
Now, what in all of your experiences with female leadership have you locked onto as those are qualities of female leaders that really I enjoy and celebrate?
Wisdom, I think. One of the ones I was thinking about last night, actually, which I don't know if we discussed before, but I was thinking about meekness, which I know in the Bible, apparently reading is kind of quite hard to translate into the English, because I think sometimes that can have negative connotations. When we think about someone being meek, it seems weak, but I think that means being humble and being willing to listen to God and to obey Him. And I think God can really use someone like that. And I think there's quite a lot of strong women I know. I can think of one at our church, and I think, gosh, yeah, I'd say she was meek, but I think that's kind of strength under control when you're being meek. It's not a position of weakness, and that humility as well is quite beautiful, I think.
I would say being bold, like women that are just bold and courageous. They just go for what God is calling them to do. I watched a YouTube video the other day, and there was a woman, Australian woman, I forget her name, but she was on the tube preaching the gospel, and she was so bold, and it was just, it was really inspiring. But I would also say, compassionate, so like having a heart for the people that they're leading and hearing, what they're going through, or being able to kind of, have a heart for people.
Becca, if we can just pick up on that point about boldness, and Jill will talk to some of the things you want to say in just a second. If on your leadership journey, how has boldness been developed in you, and how has that then outworked in the different areas of leadership that you're now walking in?
Yeah. Okay. So if you asked me maybe 7 years ago, do I want to be a leader? I probably would have said no. And it's not because I'm a woman, it's more just because I felt more comfortable following than leading. And then when I first came to the church I'm going to now, the belief was very much that all of us can be leaders, which really surprised me. And so I ended up going on the leadership training program, and getting to the end of that, and the aim of that was to open your own discipleship group. And I didn't feel ready at that point, but a couple of years later, I felt quite stirred up to do it and open a group. And I was talking to you, Gabe, about it, and just saying, I really don't feel like a leader. What do I have, necessarily to teach the girls? And you said to me, well, why don't you talk to God and ask him to explain or how he sees me as a leader? And so I prayed about it, and immediately felt him say to me that I'm following him while leading the others. And so that immediately just put me at ease, because I didn't feel like it was totally just on my shoulders. I would be following him or talking to him, and then and leading the girls and doing that. And so I did open my group, started with one person, grew to 12, shrunk and grew again.
Ebbs and flows.
Exactly. But yeah, great. I've got a great group of girls that I'm
And
working
how's
with.
that spilled over into professional life?
Yeah, so I think I had that opportunity at church, and then another couple of leadership opportunities at church as well, as on the welcome team, and we used to do a kind of rota of leading, and also doing a bit of public speaking as part of the evangelistic event I was talking about, Reveal Lounge. So I think it just gave me more confidence, and then in the workplace a couple of opportunities opened up, and I was leading people through the projects that I was running, and then I got a role, or I've had roles in kind of line management. Yeah.
So is it fair to say that really it's the church that's awakened and released your desire to lead, and it's spilled over into a workplace leadership role?
Yeah, I'd definitely say that I've kind of got the room to kind of explore and grow and make mistakes, and then from that place it's opened up at work as well. Yeah.
Amazing. So it's really challenging to hear and encouraging to hear all of the different ways that women are leading. And then if we think particularly about church context, we can't really go into all of the verses one by one. That's not really the purpose of the show. But whether you're complementarian or you're egalitarian, everyone has to interact with the scriptures and understand the scriptures relative to how they then step into ministry themselves. Jill, how would you say you've wrestled with this particular area? Because I know you're quite passionate about seeing women in every level of leadership.
It has been a wrestle, but a really exciting one, because I think initially when I looked at those verses, they really frightened me, and I was kind of, if I'm honest, I was quite angry at God. Like, why would this be in your word? Like, because I genuinely feel like God loves women, because when I look at it at face value and I look at the Bible in its entirety, I see women that were always given a voice. Like, Jesus first appeared to Mary Magdalene. Priscilla and Aquila were a couple, and they taught Apollos in the things of God. There were lots of examples. Deborah ran a whole country. So it was hard for me to reconcile the two things together. But then as I've studied it further and seen what Paul may have been implying and why, and the context of the situation, it's like something you said to me once, in that, if somebody, for example, was struggling with sin and you sent them to somebody and they said, oh, just gouge your eye out, you wouldn't really say that was, and they did it literally, you wouldn't say that was great advice, but it's still in the Bible. And it is looking at the Bible in its entirety and understanding as a whole what it's saying. So I've definitely got some peace in those areas now by understanding why and what particular time Paul was talking to and why and what was going on within the Corinthian church, for example, if we're talking about 1 Corinthians 14, there was definitely a context and reasons why that was said, and obviously wrestling with that and then actually looking at God is consistent, and Deborah also ran a country, so I'm like, okay, understanding that there is more to the picture than what meets the eye initially.
And it's fair to say that when you get involved in these big discussions, complementarian versus egalitarian, the two major problem verses are 1 Timothy 2 and 1 Corinthians 14, 34 to 35. They both relate to women speaking in church and women's authority position over men. As you said, they do need to be wrestled with in context. And there are ways of understanding both the passages in context and out of context. And what we want to try and do increasingly is be faithful to text, but also explore, as you said, full possibilities. Now, also there are other discussions, Jesus versus Paul. It seems like Paul, although he was very pro-women in many areas, has these two difficult texts. But do we see any problems in Jesus' leadership, and what kind of things does he facilitate? Certainly with the Samaritan woman, you see an evangelist that won a whole city, and Jesus was...
Totally.
He didn't tell her to go and bring everybody to him. She went out as the evangelist. She went out in a leadership role. And so we could have a lot of intricate conversations about that, I'm sure. But suffice to say, there are certainly within scriptures lots of women fulfilling the highest levels of leadership. And one of the key ones is prophets.
Yeah.
And I think that biblically speaking, prophets are one of the most important roles, so to speak, in the church.
Yeah.
We'll come back to reflect on Acts 2 just as we finish. But then let me ask you, bringing your worldly leadership experience, I don't mean that in a negative connotation, but what you're doing in the world, and then thinking about church, what kind of ministry opportunities have you had in church? And where would you perhaps like to see those develop to?
Yeah, so I actually feel within our church that I've had amazing opportunities. Like I've been honoured in a way that I just, I genuinely feel like it's been encouraged. I felt that I've been alongside men and sharing that experience together. For example, writing the song that we just had, that just had some success. That was alongside Fabio, who's a leader, and it's like I was encouraged to join him on that journey. It wasn't sort of, there's no sort of like us versus them. So I just feel like my experiences have been quite positive, actually. It's more when I look at the world as a whole and just generally what's going on that I struggle with some of the ways that women are still viewed as sort of like not as important in some circumstances.
Yeah. Ladies, if I can ask for a brief thought on this. Opportunities you've had in church context?
I think the same as Jill. I think my experience within church has been great. Like I feel like I'm heard. I feel like I'm listened to. I feel like I literally, maybe I don't look for things, but I just don't see any difference between. It's not an us and them thing. We're all brothers and sisters in Christ, as far as I'm concerned. And I think opportunities on the worship team I found, and opportunities to run a cell, and I think. For me, it's been quite a level playing field, actually. So
interesting.
So at our church, we've got hundreds of leaders, lots of different small disciple groups, and about 75% of them are women. So it's great to see lots of women in leadership positions. I think for me, it's just important that women are able to be who God is calling them to be, and free to do that.
I think the same. I think it's very common for us to see women as Sunday school teachers and worship leaders and missionaries, but it'd be really nice to see going forward like more women in teaching positions and in the pulpit preaching. And for me, I just feel that sometimes we kind of really concentrate on who the vessel is, and as in, is it a man, is it a woman? I think actually sometimes that God is looking for people who are willing and who's saying, here I am, send me. And I think that could be a man or a woman. So it'd be really nice, rather than concentrating on the vessel, like look at the source, which is God. And I think he can anoint and he can choose who he wants to choose and who he wants to help rise up. So I think, going forward, it'd be really good to kind of take our eyes a little bit off man or woman kind of thing, or the class, or, and just think, let God use who he wants to use, basically.
Definitely.
Wow.
So, Jill, just as we come to a close, what are your thoughts as we look forward? How should the church navigate this journey towards more diverse leadership?
So going on from Juliet's point, we're all one in Christ Jesus. It says that in the word, obviously. So it's not a battle of the sexes. It's not a battle to get to the top. We're all in this together. We're all one body. So it's not tipping over into like one sex is more powerful. It's not that. It's and also if we look at the life of Jesus, he was a servant. He went around serving people, and he didn't think about a position. He just thought about what God had asked him to do. So if we look at leadership from that perspective, I think that's a really challenging and refreshing way to go into the future.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Well, ladies, I really want to thank you for coming and joining us on this conversation. It's been great to hear each other's points of view, hear people's experiences, and hear how we're journeying as a people of God towards a future that we believe that God has for us. And I think for me, the most exciting and interesting thing is to be able to sit down and have a conversation, rather than having entrenched positions and feeling there needs to be a battle or defending ourselves, more having opportunities to chat. And I think that through anything we'd hope to share with our viewers today is that they would want to also hear each other and hear where the different sides are coming from. I just wanted to read a verse for us just as we look forward to all that God is going to do. And in the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams. Even on my male servants and female servants in those days I will pour out my spirit, and they shall prophesy. There's a wonderful diversity represented there, and we hope to see that revealed increasingly through his body.
Amen.
Amen.
Definitely.